Mike Waddell and David Glenn back with you here on the North Carolina Sports Network following a 3-week dash where we have literally been all across the bold North State and beyond. And David, after the Final Four, we started in Wilmington for UNCW Seahawks Alumni Weekend and our North Carolina Pork, Bacon, and Baseball Tour. Then you stayed in the Port City and headlined the second annual Coach Bill Dooley Education Foundation Connor Bar Celebrity Golf Tournament. And we also had a chance to join our newest partner, NC by Train, on their Rockingham special from Raleigh to Rockingham for the return of NASCAR racing to the Rock and the North Carolina Education 250 Xfinity Series race won by Jesse Love, who was later disqualified for an illegal suspension. You can't get more North Carolina racing than that. And then Sammy Smith, who drives for Junior Motorsports, was declared the winner of the sold-out race. David, the pace in North Carolina for sports really never slows down, but in the vernacular of NC by Train, sometimes it just changes tracks.
Yeah, that's well put, Mike. And I was glad to have you with me on many of those travels, both looking in the rearview mirror and some things that are coming up, right? Because when you and I decided to create and launch the North Carolina Sports Network back in late 2023, one of our intentions was just to share the great stories of the people and places and, of course, sports of the state of North Carolina. And when we look backward, we have those examples that you mentioned among many others. I know you were a part with the North Carolina Sports Network of doing our part in Western North Carolina in the horrific aftermath of Hurricane Helene. I mean, you were out there, distributing North Carolina Sports Network gear to people who just literally needed food and clothing and other really basic resources. So I love the fact that our travels in person take us almost from coast to coast, literally the coast in those examples that you just mentioned. And you know the deal. We have a lot of viewers and readers and listeners in Charlotte and Asheville and to the west, in Boone and other parts of, say, the northwest part of our state. We're big in the Triangle. We're big in the Triad. And we're really big in Greenville to the east and Wilmington and other places at the coast. So when you and I were able to mix in a trip to Rockingham with our friends at NC by Train, that just added one more element from our sports culture, but to our statewide travels. We had a great time in the midst of that sold-out crowd with some of our friends from Atlantic Tire and Service, one of our great partners here at the North Carolina Sports Network. And I loved my time at the beach, as I always do. And you know how much I love throwing out ceremonial first pitches. I was able to do that prior to the UNC Wilmington baseball game. And then we fed hundreds of people, it felt like. We gave out hundreds of free T-shirts. We were well received by all of our friends at the beach, including our great friends at Jimmy's Bar and King Neptune Restaurant in Wrightsville Beach. Also, I had brunch again at the original Salt Works with our friend Bob Hubbard. UNC Wilmington itself has been a great partner of ours. Of course, I've been an adjunct professor there at times over the years. It just kind of was a reinforcement of our themes here at the North Carolina Sports Network, whether it's having fun or helping our sponsors or throwing out a first pitch or going to a great race. I'm just honored to be a part of it. And the more we get around our great state, the happier I am and the better it is, I think, for our North Carolina Sports Network.
Absolutely. I tell you, just taking that Amtrak train, the Rockingham special from Raleigh's Union Station down to the race, that was the best experience I think I've ever had in going to a sporting event, not having to drive, not having to put up with all the traffic, not having to put up with the expense.
No parking.
And the challenge of being around the parking. I mean, we literally got on the train there in downtown Raleigh right after 9 o'clock, and we pulled straight in to the track complex there at Rockingham, the former North Carolina Motor Speedway, had a ball. I mean, Wi-Fi on the train, food, drinks coming back, more drinks, less food, but it was a lot of fun and it was sold out. I mean, I think this could really be a different way for people to go to all sorts of things. And I know you and I are already making our plans to take North Carolina by train from Raleigh down to Charlotte for ACC football kickoff coming up in July. Man, it's creeping up on us. And I tell you, it's nice that we do have these breaks, though, David, away from basketball, away from football to kind of recalibrate and then get right back into it. We have the PGA Championship coming to Quail Hollow in May. We have more events coming up with North Carolina Pork as they look to set some new world records. More on that to come in the weeks. But, brother, we got to put a cap on this basketball season because we have a special edition of Time Out coming up with Coach Kerry Keating later this week on the North Carolina Sports Network. But it's important to go ahead and ease right back into it. And I know you had some things on your mind. And David, as a whole, the ACC is coming off one of its most disappointing seasons in the modern era with only 4 of its 18 teams invited to the NCAA tournament and only Duke advancing past the round of 64. So let's bite off a big bite of this steak right from Jump Street. Do you believe the ACC will be better this season than it was this past season?
The short answer, Mike, is not necessarily. I actually see a snapshot very similar to what you and I talked about last summer prior to last season. You and I discussed one elite team and only one in the ACC. That was Duke, and we were proven to be right about that one. We talked about maybe a half a dozen or so other teams capable of making the NCAA tournament, and then maybe 10 or 11 teams in the bottom half or so of the newly expanded 18-team ACC, where we said we would be surprised if they were in the NCAA tournament conversation come the month of March. And in the end last year, we were certainly right about Duke. We were right about Clemson being good. We were right about Louisville before many others were. We were right about, in the end, North Carolina, although the Tar Heels certainly cut it close. But several other teams, especially Pitt and Wake Forest, come to mind. Maybe a few others. We had projected the Panthers and the Demon Deacons as possible March Madness teams when we had our conversation in the preseason or last summer. Those just never got over the hump. They ended up with NIT-style resumes, and the ACC ended up with that record low. Percentage-wise, 4 out of 18 NCAA tournament invitations is the worst since they lifted the restrictions on the number of teams per conference that could be invited to the NCAA tournament. That was way back at the end of the 1970s. So could that happen again? Could there be back-to-back disappointing ACC seasons? Yes, it could happen again. This time, and we're going to explore these details on today's show, I see Duke and Louisville as teams that have a chance to be outstanding again during the upcoming 2025-26 season. I see Clemson and SMU and North Carolina as other strong possibilities for, let's call it, the ACC's top tier, maybe top 6 in an 18-team league. I see Miami under its new head coach, Jay Lucas, as a team on the rise. We'll get into those details. And then I see a bunch of teams. Notre Dame, Syracuse, Wake Forest, Pitt, NC State, Virginia, those latter 2 also under new coaches that could go either way, depending on what else they add in the transfer portal in these coming weeks and months, and whether or not they can build some chemistry and confidence during the early part of next season, which of course is still many months away. The bottom line, maybe half of the 18-team ACC, in my eyes, has a legitimate chance to be a contender next season. But do I think the league is ready to get back to the status that it held for a really long time, the best college basketball conference in America? No, I definitely do not see that in the cards for the ACC right now.
I tell you, when I look at this transfer portal and the coaches that I talk to on a regular basis, they're miserable right now. I can't use the language they are using to describe the landscape that they're having to navigate right now. And it's not just because they're paying players. It really has little to do with that. It has to do with no order at all. And last year, it was the SEC going into the ACC and raiding the cupboard, if you will, taking some of the ACC's players that maybe had not reached high status into developing that talent and making it great. And as a result, the SEC moving forward and just doing a great job of representing their conference and building up that brand, maybe to an equal status of where SEC football has been through the years. Do you see the ACC this year doing a better job in the transfer portal, especially head to head against their Southern rivals?
Short answer is no, Mike. And let's remember the Southeastern Conference set the all-time record for most invitations for any single league to any NCAA tournament. And of course, the SEC had two teams in the Final Four in the form of Florida and Auburn, and they had the eventual national champion in the form of those Florida Gators. So the demise of the ACC in men's basketball and the rise of the SEC in men's basketball are related. They are not merely coincidental. And for those who maybe weren't with us here at the North Carolina Sports Network last year, we were writing about this a lot at our website, ncsportsnetwork.com. The ACC 1 year ago signed only one SEC player who became a high-impact starter for an ACC team. It happened to be UNC. They signed big man Van Allen Lubin from Vanderbilt of the SEC, and Lubin ended up being a pretty regular starter for the Tar Heels and a good one in the end for UNC. When you flip it at the same time, there was a massive, so one example of former SEC regular becomes ACC big-time high-impact contributor. One example. When you flip it and look for examples going the other direction, there was a massive raid of the ACC with SEC teams plucking really established starting players off the rosters of ACC teams in the transfer portal. Georgia Tech star Miles Kelly became a starter for that Auburn team that went to the Final Four. Wake Forest starting forward Andrew Carr transferred to Kentucky. Virginia Tech star Sean Padula, the veteran point guard, transferred to Ole Miss, and they became a good team. There were other examples, but you see the theme just among those three examples. The SEC teams that signed those ACC starters all made the NCAA tournament and sometimes did spectacular things. The ACC teams that lost those high-caliber, proven starters as transfers all missed the NCAA tournament. So that was one of the ugly themes of last season from the ACC's perspective. We have also talked about ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips discussing at league meetings that the league's men's basketball programs better do a better job of adjusting to this new name, image, likeness world, or the league risks getting left behind on a more regular basis rather than, say, a one-year anomaly. So what has happened so far this spring, to get back to your question? A lot of prominent players have not made their decisions yet, so this answer could change in the coming weeks. But at least for now, Mike, it looks as if the SEC has raided the ACC again. Let me give you the not very long list of proven SEC starters who have already announced that they're transferring into the ACC. Remember, last year there was only one example of a guy who turned out to be a high-impact regular starter. Again, it's the North Carolina Tar Heels who raided the SEC, starting Crimson Tide forward Jaron Stevenson, 6'11" guy, phenomenal prep player in the Chapel Hill, North Carolina area. He has decided to transfer to UNC from the Alabama Crimson Tide. So score one for the Atlantic Coast Conference. They reached into the SEC and plucked away a proven starting caliber player, in that case from the Crimson Tide to the Tar Heels. But again, it's one thing if it's a balance back and forth, whether it's 1-1 or 10-10. If it was a balance, we wouldn't have such a tilting of the scales in favor of the SEC. Whereas there is one example so far of SEC to ACC transfers, and I don't mean any player. I mean proven starting caliber players. There are a lot of backups who are moving in both directions. But listen to this list in the opposite direction, Mike. One of the best players we followed all year long in the Atlantic Coast Conference a season ago was Pitt's young point guard Jalen Lowe. All ACC player, 35 minutes a game for Jeff Capel and the Panthers, 17 points per game. Really good, get to the line, attack the rim guy, great free throw shooter, good assist man, good steals man. He has left Pitt and signed with the Kentucky Wildcats. Who else fits this description? Miami's veteran point guard, Nigel Pack. He was part of some great Miami teams. He was part of some bad Miami teams, and he actually got hurt last year. That was part of the Hurricane season falling apart and the stepping away of the legendary veteran coach Jim Larinaga. Nigel Pack has left the Hurricanes via the transfer portal and signed with Oklahoma of the SEC. Notre Dame's best big man is a guy named Tay Davis, 15 points per game. He has entered the portal and signed with the Oklahoma Sooners of the SEC. Florida State's starting big man, Malik Ewan, really good player. Could have been a part of Luke Laux' new tenure as the successor to Leonard Hamilton in Tallahassee. He entered the portal. He signed with the Arkansas Razorbacks of John Calipari. His own teammate, Taylor Bull Bowen, starting forward for the Florida State Seminoles. 25 plus minutes per game, 40 plus % three-point shooter. He entered the portal. He signed with the Alabama Crimson Tide. I mean, those are just some of the examples. But again, back to the numbers, there's one example, Jaren Stevenson moving from Alabama to UNC, of the SEC proven quality starting player to the ACC. I'm up to 8 or 9 examples already of the ACC proven commodity. Again, I'm not talking about bench players. I'm not talking about forecasting improvement in a different role. I'm talking about guys who have been there, done that. Notre Dame forward Tay Davis, Pitt point guard Jalen Lowe, Miami point guard Nigel Pack. Boston College's starting power forward Elijah Strong is going to be playing for the South Carolina Gamecocks of the SEC this year. Those Florida State examples, and there are others. Miami had a freshman guard named Jalil Bethea, McDonald's All-American. He's left the Hurricanes and signed with the Alabama Crimson Tide of the SEC. So again, it's not done yet. There are transfer dominoes still to fall. But those articles I wrote last season that helped explain the rise of the SEC and the demise of the ACC, to this point, that theme has remained the same, and that is not good news for the Atlantic Coast Conference.
And you talk about Jaren Stevenson. I mean, he was a most of the time starter for Nate Oates, but it wasn't like he was, tripping the light fantastic in the SEC, and they didn't seem to be that disappointed that he was leaving. So it is a return, though, of a North Carolina kid who everybody thought was going to come to Carolina originally, and now he's back in Chapel Hill. So maybe it comes back to where it's a great fit. And likewise, it's probably a better fit for Ian Jackson to be in New York City and playing for Rick Pitino. It seems like that is a very interesting situation right there with the veteran NBA and collegiate head coach Pitino really much cycling his entire roster out right now and even discharging R.J. Lewis, who is the, Big East Player of the Year, just told him to hit the road jack. It seems like coaches, along with players, are very easy to cut those ties right now if they feel like they can get just a little bit better on the court.
Yeah, you're right. And you're right about Jaren Stevenson, too. There are starters and then there are stars, right? Jaren Stevenson might be a star, and he was a most of the time starter for Alabama, but there's a little bit more of a leap of faith there. Whereas some of my examples of the ACC guys going to the SEC, Jalen Lowe was flat out all ACC, right? I mean, Malik Ewan of Florida State, I thought was one of the better big men in the entire ACC last year. He'll be suiting up for Arkansas. Jalil Bethea was one of the best young guards in the ACC last year. He's headed to Alabama. Tay Davis could have been one of the building blocks in the front court for Micah Shrewsbury at Notre Dame this year. Instead, he's going to be at Oklahoma. So, it's not a well-balanced list is the bottom line. And if the ACC keeps getting outnumbered by a 10-to-1 ratio in terms of starting caliber players heading in opposite directions against the SEC, why would we believe that last year's theme is going to end?
David, you do a great job of tracking the transfer portal on our website, ncsportsnetwork.com. That is brought to you, folks, by Excel Moving and Storage. They're always getting people to go from here to there. They've moved me twice over the last 2 years. So they do a great job in keeping track of your belongings, just like David does a great job of keeping track of all the comings and goings here in the Atlantic Coast Conference. And before we start talking about incoming transfer, DG, let's talk about the schools here in the Atlantic Coast Conference who have really been just torn down to the nub in terms of their rosters. Who has been decimated by this year's transfer portal?
Yeah, quick reminder that 1 year ago, one of our summer themes was at places like Boston College and Virginia Tech. You simply can't have other teams from other leagues swooping in, taking your starting caliber players, often because of name, image, likeness, money issues, not always, but often. You just can't expect to hit the ground running or fail to miss a beat, right? Boston College and Virginia Tech were doomed heading into last season because their rosters and especially their starting lineups had been picked over by other schools from other power conferences. The answer to your question this year, and I want to put an asterisk to the first part of this, is that the three schools that have been most decimated by outgoing transfers are three schools that had coaching changes. So I don't think there's reason to hit the panic button in these examples. Remember, BC and Virginia Tech a year ago, they weren't going through coaching transitions. It's extra alarming when you keep losing starters under those circumstances. It is different when you have a coaching change because every player and almost every coaching change, sometimes it's different if the head coach is promoted from within, so it's a guy the player is already familiar with. But most of the time, if you have a brand new head coach and it's somebody you're not familiar with, you're at least going to consider the transfer portal. So the answer to which ACC schools have been most decimated by the outgoing portal so far this spring: Virginia, coaching change; Florida State, coaching change; Miami, coaching change. And again, it's an asterisk, no reason to panic, but at all three schools, 4 or 5 starting players who were eligible to return all hit the portal. I mean, that's about as massive a hit as you can take, right? You have potentially 4 or 5 returning starters, but you end up with 0 because of the portal. Now, again, that's not the fault of Luke Laux at Florida State or Jay Lucas at Miami or Ryan Odom at Virginia. It's just the way it goes, and that explains the exodus in those 3 cases. Those coaches, those programs deserve the benefit of the doubt for exactly that reason. Beyond those 3, Boston College lost 3 starters to the portal again. And that is now an alarming year after year trend for the Eagles during this name, image, likeness era. It happened last year. It happened this year. There is just no way to build a consistent winner under those circumstances, period. And then there are a bunch of examples, Mike, where a high caliber player on an ACC team, sometimes the best player on the team, has hit the outgoing transfer portal. And that is almost always a bad sign, red flag, or whatever you want to call it. At Cal, Andre Stojakovic, rising junior, 18 points per game, honorable mention All ACC. He hit the portal, as did 6th man of the year Jeremiah Wilkinson of the Bears. As the old movie saying goes, those 2 developments are bad news for the Bears. At Georgia Tech, starting point guard Nate George, he's actually staying in the ACC, he's headed to Syracuse, and their star wing player Duncan Powell, he's headed to the Big East at Providence. They both hit the outgoing transfer portal. That's bad news for the Yellow Jackets. At Notre Dame, I mentioned the starting power forward Tay Davis, rising senior, hard to replace 15 points per game. He transferred to Oklahoma. That's bad news for the Fighting Irish. At Pitt, we mentioned the starting point guard, All ACC Jalen Lowe, rising junior, another all-conference player, transferred to Kentucky. Bad news for the Panthers. And at Stanford, starting guard Ozias Sellers. He was probably the team's second best player last year after the senior forward Maxime Reynaud, who was All ACC, and he's off to the NBA now. Ozias Sellers transferred to St. John's. That is bad news for the Cardinal. Now, obviously, almost every team loses players to the portal every year. Truly, 361 out of 364 Division I men's basketball programs lost at least one guy to the portal. So that's just life in the new world. Duke, by the way, was one of the three that did not, and the only ACC team that fit that description. But when you lose your best players, it is very, very difficult to be consistently successful in the aftermath of those sorts of departures. So if the ACC has another disappointing season next year, this development will be among the biggest reasons why.
Well, you just mentioned all these great players and their wonderful names, but people don't have any time to get to know these players because just as soon as Nate George is, doing things down in Atlanta for the Yellow Jackets, he's off to Syracuse and people just get confused. David, you even mentioned the fact that some of these rosters had been decimated more than others, but North Carolina literally has one guy that is guaranteed to be back on the roster next year in Seth Trimble that anybody really knows about.
Yeah, you as a former athletic director at the Division One level would have an appreciation for this because the nature of that bond between fans, especially big money boosters, and their alma mater or their favorite school, whatever it happens to be, translates in a lot of ways, right? It translates to who shows up for games and fills your seats and buys your season tickets. It translates to how much do they care to watch on TV, which, as we know, has been the case for decades, is the driving force of the economic engine for major college sports these days. As much as they love ticket revenue, they get infinitely more millions because of their TV partners and the mega millions who are watching on TV. The point that I raise, Mike, to answer your question somewhat briefly, is that we have had many other inflection points in professional and college sports where a lot of fans complained about certain things. Could be, in the NFL, rules changes. And some have called it the wussification of the NFL, right? They don't like that you can't hit a quarterback a certain way. They don't like that the safety can't hit the wide receiver on a crossing pattern, up around the helmet or, make him pay for going across the middle. For when all is said and done, after all the complaining and lots of people saying, I'm never watching the NFL again, or back when free agency became a thing in professional sports, I'm never watching Major League Baseball again because now these guys are allowed to jump teams in a way they weren't before. I have been through dozens of I will never watch that sport again, or I'm not renewing my season tickets, and I'm not saying the answer is zero to those who follow through on their threats, but I would summarize it as 95 to 99% of the time, after the sports fan is done complaining about this rules change or this technology change or this personnel turnover or whatever it might be, when they're done complaining, they still watch. And until the nature of that bond between fan and college sports is so fractured, so splintered, so weakened that they don't watch, they don't renew season tickets, they don't make their booster club donations. Until we reach that point, it's just same old, same old. Because if the theory of I'm so mad about name, image, likeness, which is now we're heading into our 5th year of name, image, likeness, and I've heard millions of people say how much they hate it and it takes away from their enjoyment of college sports and college basketball or the ACC or their favorite school or whatever. Well, guess what? The NCAA tournament keeps cranking out these incredibly positive TV viewership numbers. So again, it gets back to a lot of people complaining and moaning and whining and then still watching anyway. So until those numbers go down, the economic engine remains in place. I'm not saying there won't come a point where the tidal wave, hits really hard the economic engine that is running major college sports, but I am saying that I've been through this cycle dozens of times in dozens of contexts. And instead of falling by the wayside for 10 different reasons, the National Football League remains the most lucrative sports organization in the history of the world. And despite lots of complaints about college sports, it remains as wealthy as it has ever been, even as it heads into these new economic challenges. So your points are all well taken. But until people change their habits behind their complaints, then it's just not going to have the kind of impact that a lot of people have predicted.
Well, they say the more things change, the more they stay the same. And David, you mentioned Duke and Louisville as the first ACC teams that come to mind as you look ahead to the 25-26 season. And those were also your favorites at this time last year, which is really a credit to you because you saw the potential of what could be done with the Louisville team after a disastrous season in the 23-24 campaign. But why do the Blue Devils and the Cardinals stand out in your eyes heading into next season?
Yeah, it starts with star power. You need star power to compete for championships in college basketball. And Duke, even in the aftermath of Cooper Flagg and Con Knipple moving on to the NBA, the Blue Devils will have star power again next season. Isaiah Evans, Mike, played only about 14 minutes a game this year as a freshman for Duke, but he's a 6'6" sharpshooter. He's a future first-round NBA draft pick. He's going to make one of the All-ACC teams next season as long as he stays healthy. Meanwhile, an incoming freshman, Cam Boozer, son of Carlos Boozer, the former Blue Devil great big man. Cam and his twin brother is also a Duke signee, but Cam was the #2 high school senior in America. And whereas freshmen do not have the high impacts in college hoops in as high a volume as was the case for decades, just because college basketball has gotten older, Cam Boozer, I'm not saying he's Cooper Flagg, to be clear, but Cam Boozer as a 6'9", 235-pound power forward, he's not just a prep All-American. That phrase might apply to, 30 different guys or more. Cam Boozer is the rare true freshman who can be an All-ACC player right away, just as Cooper Flagg and Con Knipple were for the Blue Devils this past season. So star power in Isaiah Evans on the wing, star power in Cam Boozer in the post. I also think Patrick Gongba, who was Kaman Malawach's backup in the post this season, he's going to make a splash as a sophomore this upcoming year for Duke. He's not as big a force on defense as Malawach was, which is understandable. But to me, he's a much more well-rounded big man offensively than Malawach showed in his freshman year. He's a better passer, better scorer around the basket. So I don't know if he'll be a superstar, but that just adds to why I like Duke next season. I do think Jon Scheyer has a serious question to answer, though. Is the combination of rising junior Caleb Foster and the incoming freshman point guard Caden Boozer, Cam's twin brother, is either or the combination of those two good enough at point guard to compete for championships? Because that's the standard at Duke. Compete for an ACC title, compete to win the ACC tournament, finish in first place, go to the Final Four, Sweet 16, maybe a national title. If your answer is no, I like Caleb Foster. I think Caden Boozer is going to be great, but maybe not elite right away as a freshman. Then you got to go get a veteran point guard in the transfer portal. If your answer is yes, well, then you're betting on a better version of Caleb Foster than we've seen so far. You're betting that Caden can be really, really good right away, the way we've seen some other Duke freshman point guards over history. But that's a question that Jon Scheyer and his staff have to answer. They have a pretty good track record when it comes to such things. They're certainly going to add more talent at guard in the transfer portal. Duke is maybe the only ACC school out of 18 that has not signed anybody from the portal as we have this conversation. Now, that's about to change. They need players. They only have about, I think, 9 scholarship guys on next year's roster. And, under the current rules, you can have 13, and that rule may be changing all the way to 15 because of the House settlement. But they also have Malik Brown back as a veteran, proven, elite defender in the post. They also have Darren Harris back, another talented wing player and scorer. They have a prep All-American forward named Nicholas Kamenia, who's McDonald's All-American, et cetera. So Jon Scheyer has continued to recruit elite prospects from the high school ranks. We just have to wait and see who and how many he's going to add from the transfer portal. And then the Louisville part of my answer is basically this. Pat Kelsey won the ACC Coach of the Year honor last season because he built an entire basketball team from scratch and turned it into the second place ACC finisher and an NCAA tournament participant. Because we followed the portal at ncsportsnetwork.com a year ago, I think we were ahead of the curve on what the possibilities were for the Louisville Cardinals. There is some rebuilding to be done again this year. 6 Louisville players, including their first team All-ACC point guard Chucky Hepburn, who was a huge part of their success this past season, 6 have exhausted their eligibility, and 2 more have entered the transfer portal on the way out. But Pat Kelsey and his staff have worked their magic once again on basically all 3 recruiting trails. They have a prominent international prospect, a highly regarded prep All-American high school player, and of course the transfer portal. From the high school ranks, they signed a McDonald's All-American, Michael Brown Jr. And like a Cam Boozer at Duke, he is not just a prep All-American. Many of those guys need time to become great in this older version of college hoops with all these 23 and 24 and 25-year-old guys running around out there on the court. Michael Brown, by the way, he's already 19 years old himself as an incoming freshman, so he'll probably be the starting point guard for the Cardinals from day one. Like last year, Pat Kelsey has done his best work in the transfer portal. If we made a list, Mike, of the 10 most impressive incoming ACC portal signees for any of the league's 18 teams, Louisville would be responsible for 3 of this year's top 10, in my opinion. ACC fans are probably most familiar with the Virginia transfer who's headed to Louisville, Isaac McNeely, Cavaliers' best player last season, honorable mention All-ACC, 14 points a game, elite three-point shooter, extremely experienced. He will be one of Louisville's starting guards next season in what is his senior year. The Cardinals also signed an elite experienced player from the Big East, Ryan Conwell, also a rising senior, 17 points per game, elite three-point shooter at Xavier a year ago. He earned third-team All-Big East honors as a junior with the Musketeers. And if you can picture someone that's kind of, sort of, but not exactly like Isaac McNeely, Louisville added 2 such guys in the portal. And finally, the Cardinals have signed Kennesaw State star Adrian Woolley, yet another highly regarded wing player. I mean, most coaches would be happy with one of these guys on the wing. Pat Kelsey got 3 of these guys. It is harder to project players making the jump from kind of the middle tier leagues. You know, McNeely has strutted his stuff in the ACC. Conwell has strutted his stuff in the Big East. Those are 2 of the top 5 conferences in America. Adrian Woolley was first team All-Conference USA last season, and he was named the league's freshman of the year. He averaged about 19 points a game, 40+% from three-point land as a freshman. So that's 3 guys all shooting 40+% from three-point land. And Woolley comes with the extra bonus of he has 3 remaining years of eligibility. Also, Conference USA, by the way, was one of the top 10 leagues in college basketball last year. So it's not as if the guy's trying to make a jump in competition that's as extreme as when the incoming ACC signee comes from, say, the Sun Belt or the CAA or the Big South or the Mid-American Conference or a lot of the other leagues. Those are the reasons I like Louisville. The preceding reasons are why I like the Blue Devils again. And I will frankly, those 2, of course, Duke first, Louisville tied for second in the ACC this past season. It would not surprise me if they're the 2 top teams in the ACC again next year. Although, obviously, we have more portal news to report in the coming weeks, so it's really hard to project the entire 18-team ACC because there's a handful of coaches, Mike, that still only know maybe 2/3 of their roster and are still out there in the portal looking to add 4 or 5 additional players. I am a better person and a more effective business owner for having known and learned from Emily Parks over many years now. Emily's company, Organize for Success, helps multi-passionate business owners and executives bring harmony to all the layers of their lives, from work to side projects, from friends and family to hobbies, community, and beyond. With Emily's help, you too can make every minute matter. She helps you determine what earns your time and how to efficiently accomplish what matters. One of the many things I love about Emily is that she does not impose her will on her clients. She listens to them. That way she can better help them cultivate the lives they want to live. You can set up a complimentary call with Emily today by visiting organizeforsuccess.com.
This is the David Glenn Show, and I am Mike Waddell, joined as always by the namesake of the show, the one and only DG, David Glenn. This segment is brought to you by Organize for Success and our good friend Emily Parks. And David, when clients work with Emily, she does a great job of cutting through the haze and helping people be more productive with their time management and keeping focused on delivering results. Now, that to me sounds a lot like what guys like Brad Brownell and Andy Enfield, Hubert Davis, what they're trying to do right now in putting together their teams for next season. Now, you mentioned Clemson and SMU and Carolina as other likely ACC standouts next season. What impresses you most about the current rosters, the ones that we know about right now as we get ready to cross over into May with Clemson, SMU, and North Carolina?
Yeah, I'll take those individually. Clemson, part of my belief in the Tigers rests on my belief that Brad Brownell is an outstanding coach. He is the ACC's elder statesman at this point. He heads into his 16th season with the Tigers. It's crazy, but with the departures of, Coach K and Roy Williams and now Leonard Hamilton and Jim Larinaga and Tony Bennett prior to that and so many others, Brad is the only guy in that kind of long tenured state. But another big part of my belief in the Tigers looking ahead to next season, literally a big part, is the talent that Brad Brownell and his staff have added to their front court via the transfer portal. So remember, they're saying goodbye to the almost 7-footer Victor Locken. They're saying goodbye to the All-ACC Ian Shefflin. Those are two really good big guys. A guy named Nick Davidson, 6'10", 240. He's a two-time All-Mountain West player at Nevada, and the Mountain West is a top 10 league. So there's your probably plug-in, start-and-play center for the Clemson Tigers after they lost a bunch of starting caliber talent to either graduation or a little bit to the transfer portal. They also added the Western Athletic Conference's Defensive Player of the Year, Carter Weiling, 6'10", 225 or so. He played at Utah Valley last year, 13 points a game, 6 rebounds a game, but an elite defensive player. So Brad Brownell has him as a building block at that end of the court. And actually, oddly, Clemson has re-signed. R.J. Godfrey played for Brad Brownell, transferred to Georgia, played quite a bit for the Bulldogs last year, and now he has transferred back to Clemson. So he is a power forward, 6'8", 230. He'll be a part of the mix next year. And then a Utah transfer named Jake Wallin, 6'10", 205 or so. He's a 35% three-point shooter, not quite as big numbers as some of the other big men that I mentioned, but that's 4 guys I've mentioned, 6'8" to 6'10", 200-plus pounds, some of them great rebounders, some of them great defenders, some of them really good shooters. That's a lot of firepower that Brad Brownell has added to his front court via the transfer portal. So that's why I like the Tigers as a contender again. SMU, this is a hard-to-believe ACC fun fact, Mike, although in the transfer portal era, maybe such things should not surprise me or anybody else anymore. Only 2 ACC men's basketball teams will return, and that's an asterisk because things can still happen, right? But are expected to return. Only 2 of the ACC's 18 teams are expected to return, even 3 of their most frequent starters from last season. One is Notre Dame, actually, which I think will have its best season of Micah Shrewsbury's. It'll be 3 seasons for him there in South Bend. The other returning 3 starters is SMU, which I think will be better in its second year as an ACC member this coming season than it was this past year as a newcomer. And remember, it was a pretty solid debut for the Mustangs. 24 wins, 13-7 in the ACC, a tie for 4th place in the conference standings, a trip to the NIT under their, at the time, first-year coach Andy Enfield. And in today's world, it is not easy to retain all of your eligible to return starting players. Just take a look around the ACC. You will see most of them have lost 1 or more starters to the transfer portal. Again, it's one thing to lose end of the bench players, reserves to the portal. Sometimes that's a win-win. School gets another scholarship to hand to somebody else. Player might get more playing time somewhere else. It's rarely a good sign when your starters leave for other schools. So the Mustangs retained three quality starters. Wake Forest fans will remember Boopy Miller. He was at SMU this past season, all ACC caliber player. Another really quality veteran guard who started last year, BJ Edwards, is back. And their 7'2" center, Yiga Tolu, is also, he decided to return to the Mustangs as well. So they say goodbye to two guys who exhausted their eligibility from the starting lineup. Matt Cross is done. Chuck Harris is done. They're out of eligibility the old-fashioned way. But the other three starters all decided to stay in Dallas, and that is a really big deal. That is your foundation for Andy Enfield as he tries to turn an NIT team into an NCAA tournament team. The Mustangs also added big-time players from both the transfer portal and the high school ranks. A guy named Jaden Toombs, 6'9", 245-pound center from right there in the Dallas area, is one of the highest-ranked high school signees ever for SMU men's basketball. And from the portal, the Mustangs' most prominent signee is a 6'6" wing player named Jaron Pierre Jr. He was the 2025 Conference USA Player of the Year for Jacksonville State. Again, CUSA is a top 10 league right now. He averaged 20-plus points per game last season, compiled more than 100 assists, and shot 38 or so percent from three-point land. So that combination of returning players and exciting newcomers, to me, makes SMU a really strong candidate for the ACC's top tier next season. You know, top tier meaning maybe the top 6 in an 18-team league. And finally, North Carolina, they have questions too. Most of these teams do. Hubert Davis and his staff, Mike, did a great job of taking their biggest roster problem from last season, one we talked about on our shows and platforms a lot, that glaring lack of height and length and quality post players in particular, an obvious and completely avoidable issue a year ago on the transfer circuit. It just weighed down the entire 2024-25 campaign from start to finish for the Tar Heels. When you construct your roster poorly, there's just no way that any amount of chemistry or coaching or confidence building is going to turn you into a great team. You can become a good team with poor roster construction. In the Heels case, again, after 50 years of always having multiple high caliber post players, whether rim protectors or scorers or rebounders or a combination of those things, they just didn't have that last year. And it weighed down their entire season. Hubert Davis and his staff have turned that massive negative into a major positive. Last year, the Carolina team often started 6 foot tall, 6 foot tall, 6'3", 6'6", 6'8". That's more like a mid-major team in terms of just the height and length of your starting lineup. Next year, Carolina's starting lineup, where some versions of its rotation could include 6'2", 6'3", 6'9", 6'11", 7 feet. And it's not just height and length. These are, in some cases, really proven players. Henry Vasar, 7-footer, 235 pounds. He was honorable mention all Big 12 at Arizona last year. He's going to be a double-digit scorer. He's going to be a much better rebounder than anybody on last year's Carolina team. He's a reliable player. He's a confident player. He's a high field goal percentage player, as the best catch and shoot low post players are. And there are dozens of them in UNC basketball history to point to. He also can block some shots. Heels did not have a rim protector last year. Vasar can offer that service as well. You mentioned earlier, we mentioned Jaron Stevenson. He's 6'11", 215, formerly of the Alabama Crimson Tide. He can shoot a little bit. He's incredibly long and athletic. Hubert Davis had said that when they dissected last season, the first thing that jumped out to them was lack of length, lack of height. Well, they added 7-footer Henry Vasar, 6'11" Jaron Stevenson, high school recruit Caleb Wilson, who's 6'9". Even on the wing, 6'6" West Virginia transfer Jonathan Powell. That's a pretty good-sized wing player, right? Just as 7 foot, 6'11", 6'9", and the probable return of 6'8" Van Allen Lubin will help in these regards as well. Now, the Tar Heels, like Clemson, still need either a star to emerge in the backcourt or just positive chemistry to develop among their guards if they're going to be great next season. There's a difference between good and great. And again, Clemson and Carolina both face this backcourt challenge. But personnel-wise, the Tar Heels and the Tigers have plenty of front court talent. And in the Heels case, they have plenty now of these long, tall, talented forwards and even some traditional post players that had been a trademark for UNC basketball for about a half century, no exaggeration, prior to last year's anomaly. So those are some of the reasons that I think SMU, Clemson, and Carolina, along with Duke and Louisville, have at least given themselves a chance to be good or even potentially great in the 2025-2026 season.
David, there are four new head coaches in the Atlantic Coast Conference, and all of them, every one of them, are dealing with massive roster turnover heading into the summer. Now, out of those four new head coaches in the league, who has built the most impressive looking roster for next season?
Yeah, Mike, this is one of those answers where I might have a different answer a week from now or a month from now. But when you have that much roster turnover, those happen to be the four schools in the ACC that, as we have this conversation, still have the most open scholarships. So let's put an asterisk on this answer, because Will Wade at NC State, or Luke Laux at Florida State, or Ryan Odom at Virginia, who have already done, in all three cases, some good things in the transfer portal, they may have some more big-time incoming signees where we would have to recalibrate our answer after seeing that, those new headlines. But my answer for now, among the four new head coaches in the ACC, is Jay Lucas of Miami. He, of course, is the former Duke assistant under John Shire. Jay Lucas has already done, in my opinion, the most impressive things of those four new ACC head coaches. And I believe he's even quickly made the Canes an NCAA tournament contender with his portal additions. And by the way, quick side note, he's not the only one, but Jay Lucas will have 0 returning scholarship players at Miami. 0. And it's close to 0 at those other three schools as well that have new head coaches. Jay Lucas grabbed 2 probable starters from Big Ten schools. He grabbed 1 from the Big 12. He grabbed 1 from the Mountain West, and he grabbed 1 from the high school ranks. And I mention these backgrounds because recent history has shown us, Mike, that whereas it is possible to go from a bottom-tier Division I conference and plug yourself into the ACC and be really, really good. That does happen. It just doesn't happen nearly as often as when you find a proven commodity, let's say from one of the other Power 5 leagues. You just have a much better idea of what you're getting because you've already seen that guy excel while playing with and against the highest caliber of competition that college basketball has to offer. So, for example, at point guard, Miami has signed Michigan's starting point guard last year, Trey Donaldson. He's actually from Tallahassee, Florida originally, so he gets a little closer to home, although Miami's a long way from Tallahassee. When Elliot Cadeau of Carolina transferred to Michigan, Trey Donaldson said, well, I don't want to be the backup after being the Wolverines starter last year. So he puts his name into the portal after Elliot Cadeau jumps to become a Wolverine. Trey Donaldson also, by the way, was a player at Auburn for 2 years prior to his stint at Michigan. He's a double-digit scorer. He had 150-plus assists last year. Good steals guy, pretty good three-point shooter as well. So Miami, right out of the gate under Jay Lucas, will have a proven commodity point guard in Trey Donaldson. On the wing, he'll have a guy who started at New Mexico last year. Again, Mountain West is a pretty good league. Guy's name is True Washington, double-digit scorer, pretty good three-point shooter, very good defensive player. On the wing as well, and this is the one that rubs some Duke fans the wrong way, a prep All-American named Shelton Henderson had been signed with the Duke Blue Devils since last November. And again, Jay Lucas, along with John Shire and his staff, was one of the reasons Shelton Henderson picked Duke to begin with. Well, Shelton Henderson ended up asking out of his letter of intent with Duke after Jay Lucas was hired as the head coach of Miami. Why? Well, Shelton Henderson is a guy who was very attached to Jay Lucas, and when he saw him get his first opportunity as a head coach, and he saw the talent that's both returning and perhaps incoming at Duke in the form of the high school guys we know about, but probably some transfer portal additions of a high caliber as well. Shelton Henderson saw a better opportunity for a more immediate playing time at Miami. He's a physically imposing 6'6", 220-pound guy. He will not look like your typical true freshman physically. He likes to attack the basket, 5-star prospect, top 25 high school seniors in America. So Jay Lucas has another probable starter right there on the wing. At power forward, he went to the Big Ten and signed a 2-year starter for the Indiana Hoosiers named Malik Reneau. 6'9", 230. Malik is originally from Miami, Florida. He played at Montverde Academy there in Florida, same school where Cooper Flagg was for a year prior to playing at Duke. So there's a little bit of that not only, of course, recruit high caliber talent. Jay Lucas knows that's the starting point for all of this and what he's trying to build at Miami. But it doesn't hurt that Trey Donaldson is originally from the state of Florida. It doesn't hurt that Malik Reneau is originally from the city of Miami. And continuing the theme of building a high caliber starting lineup essentially from scratch, Jay Lucas is trying to become this year's version of what Pat Kelsey did at Louisville last year. Massive roster exodus, but hit the transfer portal in intelligent ways, sprinkle in some high school talent, sprinkle in some international talent, and maybe you have an ACC contender and an NCAA tournament participant. I believe here, and again, Jay Lucas still has a handful, I think 4 or 5 scholarships still open, so he can build on this, but his starting center is likely to be a 2-year starter from TCU. That was the Big 12 reference that I made earlier. Ernest Udeh is 6'11" and 260 pounds. He is originally from Orlando, Florida, continuing that theme. Reliable rebounder, strong on defense, began his college career at Kansas. Not a big scorer, but kind of like, Duke didn't need Kaman Malawach to be a big scorer. He rebounded, he defended, and he helped in other ways. I think that starting lineup, Trey Donaldson from Michigan, True Washington from New Mexico, Shelton Henderson, Prep All-American, Malik Reneau from Indiana, Ernest Udeh Jr. from TCU, and maybe one of those guys will be beaten out for a starting position. But that's an ACC caliber starting lineup, and Jay Lucas isn't even done yet. He has signed, I don't even know how to pronounce this guy's name because he's international, but 6'7" Slovakian wing, Timotej Malovec. My apologies to him and his family if I screwed that up. He signed a Missouri transfer named Marcus Allen, who's from Norland High School in Miami, again, continuing that theme. He signed a high school player named Dante Allen, who got out of his Villanova letter of intent after the coaching change there. He's played at Montverde Academy, that same school I just mentioned, Cooper Flagg, etc. So he's another addition from the high school ranks, and Jay Lucas is still adding guys. So at the very least, that's a top half of the ACC Miami team that he has built from scratch. And when I say top half of the ACC, that's just the conservative forecast. If he keeps adding to this nice nucleus, maybe Miami is that bigger splash at the very high top tier of the ACC in year one under Jay Lucas, the way, again, Pat Kelsey pulled that magic act at Louisville last year.
Atlantic Tire and Service and their 7 North Carolina locations, stretching from the Triad to the Triangle, are proud to be partners with the North Carolina Sports Network. And there is no doubt that if you're in the market for the best in automotive care, Atlantic Tire and Service is the place to go. And as we wrap up this edition of the David Glenn Show, we are going to close out by tapping into your legal brain, David, as a practicing attorney here in North Carolina, and get your opinion on a few NCAA compliance type questions from our readers, listeners, and viewers here on the North Carolina Sports Network. So, why did so many seniors, players like Clemson's Ian Schefflin, Carolina's Jalen Withers, and others, put their names into the transfer portal even though they're already out of their college eligibility?
Yeah, it's a great question. And Mike, if people visit ncsportsnetwork.com, I have tried to separate these players from the more traditional transfers where we know those guys are going to be playing somewhere else in college basketball, or, you always reserve the right to return to your original school. Just because you enter the transfer doesn't mean you have to leave, although very few guys end up staying with their original school. The answer to the question is these guys have been advised that even though under traditional NCAA rules, they're out of eligibility. They have played 4 full seasons of major college basketball, that either they believe there's a chance that the NCAA will change its rules on eligibility to give everybody 5 full seasons of competition rather than the 4 that's been in place for my entire lifetime and yours. Or, and by the way, I don't think that scenario is very likely, or they believe that ongoing lawsuits against the NCAA will cause the NCAA to make an exception and allow today's players 1 more year. So it's like, hey, even if it's a 1% chance that this stuff happens, why don't I just put my name in so that if it does happen, I'm legally in the portal, other schools can contact me without tampering, and I reserve the right to play that 5th full season of major college basketball. The reason it's even a 1% chance, folks may have followed a couple of these cases, but the Vanderbilt quarterback, Diego Pavia, filed a lawsuit, got an extra year of eligibility on a certain argument about how, for a century, the NCAA eligibility rules were really a non-commercial type rule. Nowadays, with money being as big as it is and the creation and allowance of name, image, likeness money, people are going to court and saying, well, these aren't just eligibility rules anymore. These are limiting my ability to profit, and we're calling these things illegal restraints on trade, these eligibility rules. There's a lot of guys, Mike, that are not good enough to play in the NFL or the NBA, but if they had 1 more year of eligibility in college, maybe they could make $100,000. Maybe they could make $500,000. Even if they're not the very best player, they have economic opportunities if they're allowed to stay 1 more year at the college level. Now, whereas it has been, the NCAA has already carved out an exception that if you were traditionally exhausting your eligibility, but part of your career was in junior colleges, they're giving you 1 more year. Trayvon Spillers at Wake Forest would have exhausted his eligibility this past year under the normal rules. But because he played JUCO ball prior to App State, prior to Wake Forest, this new NCAA ruling gives him and players in his category 1 more year of eligibility at their discretion. If they want it, they can take advantage of that. There's another lawsuit that was successful where a guy who had spent part of his time at Division II said, well, I haven't had the full 4 full years of opportunity to benefit from my Division I platform, and that has limited my financial opportunities. He got an exception from a judge. Now, more recently, there was a case right here in North Carolina where a handful of former Duke players and former Carolina wide receiver J.J. Jones, they went in front of a North Carolina business court judge and made another series of arguments about how and why they deserved a 5th full season of competition. Now, that judge in this state, in that set of circumstances, said no. The NCAA is allowed to make its eligibility rules. And even though you would benefit financially from another year, perhaps, that doesn't mean they're not allowed to make their eligibility rules. So anyway, it is a long shot that Ian Shefflin, Jalen Withers, or all the others that we've included on our lists, just with asterisks because we don't think they're ever going to play college sports again. That's their logic. On the slight chance they're given an extra year, they have filled out the proper paperwork to keep their options open. What's funny, I believe, even as an attorney, if somehow, some way, the NCAA does cave on those lawsuits, does change its rules, they would, of course, issue a blanket waiver to anybody who fits that description. So it's not like, I don't think it was necessary for these guys to put their names in the transfer portal, but they did. For the record, guys who have already played 5 full years, they're not eligible for this. So, there are some people who say, why put any caps at all on the number of years that they can play? As long as they're still taking classes, and they're still eligible students, why not let them play as long as they can make money? That may happen someday, but I don't think it's happening anytime soon in major college athletics. You and I and Coach Kerry Keating, longtime head coach at Santa Clara, are going to dive into, in a much deeper fashion than we've even tried to do today, the future of college sports. And the reality is, the four major conference commissioners were all in front of the United States Congress earlier this month, April 2025, asking for them to help create a framework for the future of college sports and address many of the issues that you and I occasionally touch upon, but haven't done the deeper dive. So we're going to talk, of course, more on-court stuff with Coach Keating, but I encourage folks to check out that other show here on our platforms because I'm glad, Mike, you and I got to talk about players and coaches and programs because there is so much fascinating news related to the ACC. Some good, some not so good. We just try to tell it like it is. And folks who have been with us for a long time had some preparation for the ACC being down last year, in part because of our off-season shows a year ago. We don't claim to have a perfectly accurate crystal ball, but we tend to paint a very accurate picture overall, even if we miss on a team here and there. And we know, especially in our audience, there are people who could talk college basketball 12 months a year, even though the season doesn't last nearly that long. So thanks to everybody for being with us today as we talked more on the court stuff and these fascinating incoming and outgoing players. But I look forward to sitting down with you again, Mike and Coach Keating, on that bigger picture.
And another thing to keep in mind that is coming up here in July, it's the North Carolina Sports Awards, the second annual Pineys coming in mid-July. Be sure to focus in on our social media because you will have a chance to nominate your favorite team of the year, moment of the year, game of the year, event of the year, and coach of the year. We have so many great categories to talk about in the excellence of North Carolina sports, and it's all brought to you right here by NC Pork and the North Carolina Sports Network.